Welcome to Peptides-explained-easy. Let's break it down.
If you're on Ozempic, Mounjaro, or Zepbound and it's not working the way you expected, you're not alone. 1 in 4 people barely respond to these drugs at all. Some people lose 25% of their body weight, others lose nothing. Some feel fine, others are nauseous for months. And if you're a woman thinking about pregnancy, you have a whole separate set of fears. Today, I'm going to explain why all of this happens, because the answer is not what most people think. It comes down to 3 things. 1, how these drugs actually work at the receptor level. 2, what your DNA has to say about it. 3, what the research shows about pregnancy safety. Let's start with the receptors. Most people call Ozempic, Zepbound, and Retatrutide GLP-1 drugs, like they're all the same thing. They're not even close. Each one works on different receptors with different strengths, and that explains almost everything about how they feel. Every drug has something called an EC50. It's the amount of drug needed to activate 50% of its target receptors. Lower number means more potent. It works at smaller doses. Think of it like hot sauce. A sauce that burns your mouth at 1 drop is more potent than one that needs 10 drops to feel anything. Here are the actual EC50 numbers. Semaglutide, that's Ozempic and Wegovy, activates the GLP-1 receptor at 0.11 nanomolar. That is extremely potent, but that's all it does. It hits one receptor and it hits it hard. Tirzepatide, Zepbound, and Mounjaro activates the GLP-1 receptor at 0.47 nanomolar. That's about 4 times weaker than semaglutide, but it also activates the GIP receptor at 0.04 nanomolar, extremely strong. So tirzepatide is actually GIP dominant, not GLP-1 dominant. Then there's retatrutide. Its GLP-1 binding is the weakest of all 3, 0.775 nanomolar, 7 times weaker than semaglutide. Its GIP binding is strong at 0.064 nanomolar, and it also activates the glucagon receptor at 5.79 nanomolar, which barely kicks in until you reach higher doses, around 8 milligrams or more. This explains almost everything people experience on these drugs. Why does Ozempic cause the most nausea? Because it's 100% GLP-1 and it hits that receptor the hardest. More GLP-1 activation means more stomach slowdown and more nausea. Why does Zepbound have less nausea? Because the GIP receptor acts like a buffer. The GIP softens the GLP-1 side effects. Why does retatrutide cause the least nausea? Because its GLP-1 binding is the weakest of all 3, and the glucagon receptor barely kicks in at lower doses. At lower doses, retatrutide is basically a weaker tirzepatide with training wheels. Now here's where it gets personal. Your DNA has a vote. A landmark study published in Nature in April 2026 looked at 27,885 people taking GLP-1 medications. These were 23andMe research participants. This was a genome-wide association study, meaning they scanned the entire genome of each person to find genetic variants that predict how well these drugs work, and they found them. The first variant is in the GLP-1R gene, called RS10305420. About 40% of people with European or Middle Eastern ancestry carry it. People with 1 copy lose about 1.7 pounds more on GLP-1 drugs. People with 2 copies lose 3 or more pounds extra. The likely mechanism? This variant makes your GLP-1 receptors more efficient, giving the drug more door handles to grab onto. Think of it like having more locks that the key can fit into. More receptors that work well means the drug can do more with the same dose.
This one only matters if you're on Tirzepatide, Zepbound, or Mounjaro. People with this variant get more nausea and vomiting on Tirzepatide. Why? Because the GIP receptor normally buffers the nausea caused by GLP-1 activation. This variant weakens that buffer. And here's the kicker. If you have both variants and you take Tirzepatide, you are 15 times more likely to experience vomiting. 15 times. This study also confirmed something people already feel but don't always hear from their doctors. 1 in 4 people barely respond to GLP-1 drugs at all. In the Semaglutide data, the average weight loss was 10.2% of body weight, but 4.9% of patients lost over 25%, while 32.2% lost less than 5% or even gained weight. Genetics is part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of it. Other factors include sex, age, starting BMI, diabetes status, and how long you've been on the medication. The combined model from this Nature study explained about 21% of the variation in weight loss. That means 79% is still unexplained. We are only beginning to understand why these drugs work so differently from person to person. Now let me address the third question, the one that terrifies a lot of women. What if you're pregnant or trying to get pregnant while on one of these drugs? A separate systematic review published in Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism in 2026 pooled together 36 studies, covering thousands of women who were exposed to GLP-1 medications right before or during early pregnancy. And the key finding is this. Across large observational groups, exposure to GLP-1 medications before or during early pregnancy was not consistently associated with increased risk of major birth defects, fetal growth restriction, stillbirth, or newborn death, compared to women treated with insulin or women with similar health conditions who were not on GLP-1 drugs. Let me say that more simply. When researchers compared women who were on GLP-1 drugs around the time they got pregnant to similar women who were not, they did not find a clear pattern of harm to the baby. Birth defect rates were similar, stillbirth rates were similar, newborn survival was similar. Now, that does not mean these drugs are proven safe during pregnancy. It means we don't have strong evidence that they cause harm in early pregnancy, which is a very different thing. Most women in these studies stopped taking the drug once they found out they were pregnant. The data on continuing these medications throughout an entire pregnancy is still very limited. One encouraging finding, a pharmacokinetic study tested for semaglutide in human breast milk and found no detectable amount. The drug did not transfer into the milk. Just one study, but it's a reassuring data point for women who may want to restart treatment after delivery. And for women with PCOS, the review noted that GLP-1 medications seemed promising for improving metabolic and reproductive outcomes, since PCOS is often tied to insulin resistance, which is exactly what these drugs help with. The honest grade for the pregnancy evidence is a B. We have human data, but it's observational, not from controlled trials. The honest grade for the genetic evidence is also a B. It's a massive data set, but it's association data, not causal proof. And the receptor science, the EC50 numbers, those are solid. That's bench chemistry. So here's the full picture in one sentence. These drugs are not one-size-fits-all because they hit different receptors at different strengths. Your DNA changes how your body responds to each one, and the pregnancy data so far doesn't show clear harm from early exposure, but is far from conclusive. If you're on a GLP-1 medication and it's not working, it might not be you. It might be your receptors. It might be your DNA. And the answer might be a different drug, not more willpower. PECS is live. Learn about peptides explained in an easy-to-understand language. Track your stacks, customize them, use the educational calculator, and track your progress. A full peptide encyclopedia in your pocket.